Welcome to Nepal Now, the podcast where we look into new ideas and activities to move the country forward. My name is Marty Logan. Thanks for joining me today. I think it's fair to say that the discussion you're going to hear raises at least as many questions as it answers. We're talking about domestic abuse and women who leave Nepal to work abroad. Labor migration is a huge part of the country's economy, and, as I think this episode reveals, it has a major impact on many other aspects of life here. Earlier this century, the money that migrant workers sent home accounted for close to 1/3 of Nepal's entire economy. Today, it is closer to a quarter, still a major chunk of what keeps this country going. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Arjun Kharel, Assistant Professor of Sociology at Tribhuvan University and a research fellow at the Center for the Study of Labor and Mobility. He and co-author Amrita Gurung recently published a paper that looks at spousal abuse experienced by 148 Nepali women who worked in various countries overseas. Much has been reported about women migrant workers who are abused in their working countries, but this research focuses on domestic abuse faced by women in Nepal before and after they worked overseas, mostly in Persian Gulf countries or Malaysia. These are, aside from Nepal's neighbor India, the main destination countries for Nepali workers, women and men. One of the main findings of the research, which surprised the academics, is that women migrant workers did not face higher level of abuse after they returned home. Researchers expected that because there is such a stigma about women who go abroad alone, specifically that they will hook up with other men, that female migrants would be punished after returning home. Another surprising finding was that the women surveyed believed that it was okay for men to beat women in certain circumstances. For example, if they were not caring for children properly. In that sense, their opinions matched those of Nepali women in general, whereas researchers thought that exposure to another culture might affect the migrants' thinking about abuse. Other questions that I think the research raises include how many Nepali women who leave for overseas work are abused, and how big a factor is that abuse in their decision to leave. Arjun does have answers based on his research, as you'll hear, but I think this needs to be examined further. Also, and maybe obviously, why isn't more being done to prevent domestic abuse in general, which in turn might reduce the number of women who feel they have to leave the country? I could go on with more questions, but instead, please listen now to my chat with Dr. Arjun Kharel to learn more. Dr. Arjun Kharel, welcome to Nepal Now podcast.
Thank you very much.
We're here today to talk about your research on spousal violence against Nepali women who migrate abroad for work. In June, a paper that you co-authored on the topic was published, and we'll discuss those findings in a moment. But first, there's been a lot of highlighting of women migrant workers who are mistreated in receiving countries. And these aren't only women from Nepal, but from many other countries as well. You're not looking at that topic, and I'm interested how you came to focus on spousal violence against Nepali women who migrate abroad.
Okay, thank you. Actually, this was a very comprehensive study, and this paper is based on one section of the data collected for the comprehensive study, and the study was also conducted by funding from BSO Nepal, which was trying to implement some project in Nepal to benefit women migrant workers. And I was particularly interested in this area of research because my PhD dissertation was also on women migrant workers from Nepal and their experience in Nepal and abroad. So, and for this paper, we wanted to focus on spousal violence mainly that Nepali women migrant workers experience prior to departure and also post-return. And also this topic was very relevant because because there is a lot of stigma relating to women's migration, or women's migration is not positively perceived in the society. And even when I did the other study, we had found that these men who are left behind, then they did not feel very good in the society when their wives migrated abroad. So in that context, then we also wanted to explore, so how is women's experience after they return home. So is the incidence of violence going to increase, and is the home actually safe for women? Just to say you quickly, the finding of the study, we did not see women's migration actually increasing the rate of violence after their return to home, although many women perceived that their current experience of violence was somewhat related to their migration experience. But in many cases, violence against women persisted in pre-migration phase as well as in the destination and also after returning home.
Okay, thank you. So, if I understand correctly, women who migrated abroad to work, came home, did not experience an increase in domestic violence, although they perceived a connection between domestic abuse and their migration experience. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, actually, that was what the finding was, and we could not really tell why that was the case, but we definitely, I mean, we thought that it is because women are also aware that their migration experience is not positively perceived in the society, and they could relate that to their husbands' reaction, or let's say husband's abuse against them. Also, many times their husbands cited their migration experience uh, as like a negative factor, and they also use that as a kind of a reason when they were unhappy with their wife, and they usually perpetrated the physical violence. So one thing is that there is a negative social perception of women's migration, and then women migrant workers are also aware of it. And the second part is that their husbands have been repeatedly saying that, okay, you, for example, okay, so you went abroad and you slept with men there, and you are not a good woman, that kind of thing. And that's why they said that their husband, their migration was a reason for their violence. But when we analyzed this pre-migration and post-return violence experience, actually violence had persisted for women even before their migration. There were only 2 3, I think, in our sample, only a small number, I think around three women migrant workers who had experienced violence only after return from foreign labor migration.
Okay, wow, that's really interesting. I want to ask you more about this idea of stigma, but first, can you just very briefly lay out who you did the research with, like how many women and what kind of work they did, and all of the basic information about those women?
Yeah, we did this study on 148 women migrant workers who had returned after employment in countries, predominantly Gulf countries and Malaysia. And these women migrant workers were living in 2 districts. One is Thade, and another is Rupandei. And they were identified with the help of Pauraki, one labor migration related non-government organization, and Women Return is organization which has been actively working on the migration sector for some time. Yeah. So, and the study was conducted it was, I think, 2017. Although the paper was very recently published, it was conducted long back. Yeah, so we did collect data through surveys, and also we did focus group interviews and personal interviews with migrant workers.
Okay, and so just so I have it correct, of those women, the ones who experienced forms of domestic abuse, the number was not far from the average for women in Nepali society in general.
Yeah, I think it's just only very slightly higher among women migrant workers, and women migrant workers are also a specific kind of population in the sense that they are also the group who is more likely to experience violence and also from lower socioeconomic status in general, and that was also a reason why they were migrating in the first place. I mean, not all of them, but some of them, to escape the violence or due to the violence in the family or not having a responsible husband, etc.
Okay, I understand that. Just a more basic question then. Of the 148 women, how many had experienced abuse before leaving?
I Okay, sorry, I it's not on my head at the moment, but I think most women who experienced violence, actually they had experienced that violence before migration.
Okay. And was that violence like a main factor in them deciding to leave? Were you able to quantify that or?
It's not only like to escape the violence, but because in most cases husbands were not responsible. That means like they were not earning and they were not providing for the family, and women had to uh, take up the responsibility of feeding children and going abroad to earn. So to escape balance is not the main reason, but to earn for the family because they did not have a responsible husband. That came out during the interviews. Yeah, I remember at least there was one or two cases when women migrant workers these women they decided to go abroad because she had experienced violence from her husband and from her in-law, and she was not able to stay in the home, and she was staying with her mother, and now she had to earn as well, and that's why she went abroad.
Right, okay. So the violence led her to become, in a sense, the head of the household, and in that role, she needed to earn more money than she could at home.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Okay. I'm just curious, did any of the women say that being abroad changed their perceptions about the violence that they had experienced earlier? Like, did any of them come back being much more reactive to the violence and more willing to do something to stop it or to escape it?
Um, there were a couple of women who said like they would also retaliate when the violence was perpetrated. And also, some of these women migrant workers had actually started living separately. So they had separated from their husband. They were not divorced, but they were separated. And at that time, until that time, or until very recently, Nepal would allow men to have more than one wife legally if the first wife consented. But now that is no longer the case because of that provision. Then these women hadn't filed for divorce, and but they live separately usually, and if they had children, and they would also raise their children. Uh, so yeah, in a way, we can say that they were confident about living separately, and they were using the earnings from foreign employment to build a house or to renovate their house, and start and live independently.
Okay, that's interesting. I think you said that you've worked in this area previously. You've researched this topic before, but doing this particular research and writing up the paper, was there anything that surprised you about what you learned from these women and their experiences?
Oh, in a way, actually, we were expecting the balance rate to be much higher among women migrant workers. The rate of like especially physical violence in Nepal, because this is a very specific kind of demography. But the data was comparable. Sorry, the rate was comparable to the national level data on violence against women. And another interesting thing was women's education was important in reducing occurrence against violence, but even like up to high school, up to like the 10th grade of education wouldn't actually matter much. Women should have had a higher education, at least secondary, like 12th grade above level of education. And more than women's education, husband's education was very important. Actually, it was even more important than women's education in lowering the rate of violence against women. Although in most occasions, husband's education, higher education, would coincide with women's higher education because men were likely to marry women of higher education. And it had a significant, even like statistically significant uh, contribution in reducing violence against women. And also, we had conducted surveys on these men whose wife at the time were abroad engaged in foreign employment. So most of the men who said like they perpetrated violence against their wives, they knew that it was illegal to commit physical violence against women. So simple level of increasing awareness against GBV, gender-based violence, would not decrease the rate of violence. So it needs different sort of effort. And also men's engagement is always important in those kind of programs because it's men, so it's the spousal violence was the main type of violence against women, so they were very less likely to experience violence from their like in-laws if they had the supportive husband. So in this kind of any kind of development programs that target to decrease rate of violence against women, men should be involved in those programs. So that is also one of the findings. And also, we had asked women migrant workers about their perception of violence, and it was very surprising that many migrant workers would actually justify violence by their husbands in certain occasions, like not when women are not like taking care of children, or when women are like going to the market without telling their husband. So in like different occasions, women would justify um, the beating by their husbands. That was I mean, not very surprising in the sense that higher rate in that category is also found in other countries. But also, it was surprising because these are migrant workers who uh, had experience of foreign employment, and also had a different kind of experience now, would still justify different types of violence by their husband in different grounds.
Right, right. Yeah, that's all really interesting. I mean, maybe that latter point about women saying that they understand why they experience physical violence just is an indication of how strong these cultural, if we can call them cultural and social ideas about about relationships between husband and wife or partners and spousal abuse, how strong those ideas are among people, even if they're exposed to other ideas outside. It's hard to change those.
Yeah, just to add into that, yeah, it just shows how violence is normalized in society, and this experience, work experience, or exposure, as well as school education, is uh, unable to educate people, and not consider and not accept the violence. And yeah, and also in many occasions, women migrant workers had not responded to the violence, or they were not able to respond to the violence. It's not only because they accepted the violence, is like a normal thing, but also because there were not available support system, and uh, because responding to violence would just escalate to the violence, and when they did not have enough support system, they would just accept the violence and keep on living with their husbands.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was this idea of the stigma um, towards women who go abroad to work. And this one example, the male left behind saying you went abroad and you slept with these men. But the one that I am more familiar with is when the men have migrated and are working away, they get suspicious that the women who have been left behind are getting together with other men. And I've even heard of men, migrant workers, getting surveillance cameras set up at their home so they can watch women in Nepal while they're in another country overseas, to make sure that they're not doing anything wrong. And so it seems that no matter what role the women are in, they're always the ones who are being accused of contravening these cultural norms or these social mores. Does that make sense from what you've studied?
Yeah, there is definitely some concerns for men about their women's sexuality. So men are concerned about it when their wives are abroad, or also when their wives are at home and when men are abroad. So it's basically same kind of concern that is there. So women's presumed engagement with any other man, and here I actually also see a very important role of media. So media, there is online media and also print media, and they sensitize just some cases of women's engagement, left behind women's, for example, engagement with other, or relation with other men when husbands are abroad. Okay, and also like for example, you hear the title, okay, divorce rate is increasing because of men migration, or the Nepali headline, which is roughly translated as husband is struggling in golf and women is eloping with other men, or that kind of title, very sensitive issues. The media tends to they glamorize certain or highlight certain stories, and because people like that, and if you publish something related to that on online media, and that quickly circulates among thousands of migrant workers, and media is definitely contributing to create that kind of suspicion among men, because of the high importance given to just very few rare cases of women's extramarital relation. But yeah, I have not come across any migrant workers or migrant households which had surveillance camera. But during interviews, we for other studies, we have been told by these women migrant workers that, sorry, women left behind women, that they have to always accept the phone calls. Like if their husband calls from abroad, then like wherever they are, they should be ready to accept the call. If they are unable to accept the call, or if pick up the call, then they would have to answer like hundreds of questions later, explaining where they were, and then why they couldn't pick up the phone. So yeah, this has been a concern.
Right, right. I noticed in the Kathmandu Post recently, maybe on Monday, there was an article about this new reintegration program that the government is planning. And, it paid lip service to looking into all aspects of reintegration for migrant workers, not only the economic, but it did really emphasize the economic and how returning workers can find, a money generating activity when they're home, which is really important. But in terms of what we're talking about, what would be a good activity to put in place to help reintegration of the worker, but in the entire family, like to deal with some of these issues that arise when the two adults are living for so long in different places?
So many of these migrant workers, working conditions are horrible for most of them. They are undergoing a lot of stress, physical and mental stress, and they do not have support mechanisms in the destination. And also they have different expectations from families, relatives, and this pressure is already always there. And they are struggling. And also when they return home, we in Nepal in general, this mental health support system is very, very poor. And also they have difficulty in readjusting in the family, in the community, and gossip is very prevalent, and they are also affected by the gossip against their wife. And in many cases women live with their in-laws, and women are actually, studies have found that these daughter-in-laws are abused by father-in-law or brother-in-laws when these women's husbands are away. And sometimes these perpetrators themselves try to insult, humiliate these women by making fake stories, and especially when they don't comply with these perpetrators' desires. One thing that is really required is some sort of psychosocial support for these returning migrant workers, both men and women. That is essential. And about these reintegration programs, I'm not very hopeful about the program. I don't know if it will be successful as such, because uh, many migrants would want to remigrate anyway, because there are not many employment opportunities in the country, and there will not be enough employment opportunities through these reintegration programs. So migration will continue despite whether there is a reintegration program or not. But I think on the other aspects they can work, but I don't think there is much interest in working in the sector of providing like social support, psychological support.
Okay. Thank you very much, Arjun. There's a lot to discuss. We did talk about a lot, and there's a lot more we could talk about. It's a very broad and interesting topic. Um, Not the most positive conversation, perhaps. There are a lot of negative things around migration for both women and men as well. So thanks again for bringing to light some of these issues and helping to explain, the general topic of domestic abuse against women migrant workers. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to your program.
Thanks again to Dr. Arjun Kharel for discussing his research with me today. Please let us know what you thought. We're at Nepal Now or at Nepal Now Pod on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Yes, we are posting our episodes on YouTube, the new ones, and our earlier chats also. So if that's your favorite podcast player, you can listen to us there. I'm Marty Logan. I'll talk to you again soon.